Hey, everybody, welcome to episode 386 of the Running Rogue podcast. This is your host, Chris McClung, joined by co host James Dodds. We are excited to be back to you with another episode on the racing fundamentals. We started this conversation last week talking about our first 3 points on racing fundamentals. This is all from chapter 2 of our book, Running the Rogue Way. And now we'll get to the latter 3 points. But first, how are you doing, sir?
I'm doing well. I'm so much better. Like, I know last week I talked about the flu, but it's like every single day got a little bit better. And so, yeah, I'm just still so happy to be away from the flu that I can't think about anything else.
Yeah, you got your ass kicked
Yeah.
by sickness coming into the new year. That must have made it hard to start 2026 feeling on your feet. But you're back. And today, as we record, it's actually your birthday,
Yeah.
which is crazy.
42 today.
42 years young.
years.
How do you feel at 42?
I've been trying to put it to words. Sometimes I don't think about it much. Like today's a Wednesday and I had a conversation with an athlete starting at 7:30 and I needed to get in a lift and we have this. I coached tonight. Like part of me is just sort of like
Normal day.
this is what the day requires and I'm in it. And yet at the same time, when I'm alone in quiet spaces, I'm like, I've always been somewhat growth oriented and always looked at something like, oh, okay, well, it didn't go my way. Like, what do I need to do next time? And but 40, I think, puts you in a little bit of a headspace of I'm still there, like still growth oriented. I'm still always somewhat futuristic, and yet I'm also whispering to myself, but this is your life, buddy. Like, slow down and enjoy it too. It's not always about the iterative process, and yet sometimes it is about the iterative process. So, yeah.
Do you feel old?
I don't necessarily feel old, but I realize that time is like I'm more aware of how short life is now, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I think 40 is a natural time where people start feeling the biological clock ticking, so to speak, or that, the Grim Reaper is kind of coming for you because you get over the hill, as they say. But if you think about average lifespans, it's like, man, we've got a long way to go.
Yeah.
And obviously no day is promised. You can't operate that way. But at the same time, there's a lot of life to live. It's far from over. So you got to keep doing and striving and finding adventure and growing and all those things. And I think sometimes people just stop.
Yeah.
And that's the thing you got to fight, is being stagnant.
Yeah. I don't like the word deserve at this age because I do have a lot of people who will say, and it's sweet, it's loving. They're like, you deserve a little break or you deserve to relax. And I'm haunted by a quote. It's always like the best quotes are somewhat haunting. And heard a guy say, before you're 40, you're busy making your habits, and after 40, your habits make you. And I say it's haunting because it's very easy to take inventory of habits and be like, oh, well, some of those that I said I wanted, I better get on them ASAP because time's a ticking.
It is time.
Yeah.
For sure. Well, happy birthday again.
Thank you.
The other thing I wanted to jump in quickly too is just Houston Marathon weekend. I came from that this past weekend, got to be there the whole weekend and experience everything. Another amazing race there. As we talked about on earlier episodes, it's one of my favorite marathons and half marathons. They do it really well there, and this year was no different. And the weather cooperated with absolutely perfect conditions. Low to mid 40s at the start, warming into the low 50s. Sun was shining, wind was relatively low. I mean, it was like, the angels came down from heaven and were singing to us, and it was awesome. And we had obviously a lot of great results on the Rogue. In the Rogue family. So congrats to everybody who crushed it in Houston, and whether you're training with us or not, it was an epic day and it was so fun to be a part of it. I'm always so inspired walking away from that race because you just get to see people. I always go to the final 2 miles, mile 11 or so of the half, and then mile 23, 24 of the full. And I get to jump in with people quickly and cheer them on and give them a little pep talk before they make their finish. And it's always inspiring to just see how deep people are willing to go to the well to get their goals. And also what happens when preparation meets opportunity, and then things happen, magic happens.
Yeah. I wish I could have been there. But I had a couple athletes that pinged me and they had PRs. And this was also the Disney weekend. And
That's
I had
right.
a couple athletes out there, and I had one woman PR by 20 minutes. And at a Disney event, that's no small
Right,
thing
right.
because they have
It's
to
not set
manage
up. It's
crowds.
not set up for performance necessarily. It's more set up for getting your pictures with the characters. So yeah,
Yeah.
it was a good weekend of racing all around, and it always leaves me fired up to be a coach and fired up to continue my own running journey in its own way. So had to give a shout out, and again, shout out to Houston for they just do it right all
Mhm.
around. The other thing I want to point out is just a shout out to the city of Houston. It's always well supported out on the course there, but I'm telling you, they brought it in a different way this year. I mean, especially in that home stretch, the final 3 miles were just like a party. I mean, people were out in, not just, one or two people deep, but like 3, 4 people deep in spots. They had music, people were dancing, they had funny signs. I mean, it was just a different level than I think I've ever experienced. And I've run that race many times myself and supported it many times myself. So shout out to the city of Houston for showing up even more than they already do, because I think that made a difference as well. And I didn't get to see the whole course, but I did have some marathoners say that it was kind of like that the whole way. So that was cool to hear. And usually you have good support out there, but there can be quiet spots in Houston. But man, it sounds like the crowd just brought it. Part of that was it was cold. It was perfectly cold for racing, but also not too cold for spectating. So it was like the sweet spot for everybody to get out there and enjoy themselves.
Mhm.
So anyway, it was awesome, but highly recommend Houston if you're wanting to run a fast time in January, half or full, because honestly, I don't know that you can beat it.
Yeah. It's flat, like you said, well organized. It's a major city. It's wild for them. They can handle so much. And I don't know, it's never felt like too busy or crowded. Even, this is the first year I hadn't been there in a while, but I've only had good times when I'm out there, and it's easy to navigate. And
Yeah. And I think, we've kind of got this era, I think, where because of the popularity of running and the majors, a lot of people aren't getting into the majors through lotteries or whatever means. So you kind of have this second tier of races that are kind of getting pushed up. And I think I saw Detroit Marathon sold out in like some record time already.
wow.
So there's these kind of second tier in air quotes, because they're first tier operations clearly,
Mhm.
but second tier to the majors are really being elevated because of it. And if you're worried about getting into New York or Berlin or Sydney or whatever, just skip all of that and sign up for Houston because it's world class experience and you can run fast and the logistics are a little bit more manageable than a big major. So
Yeah.
plug for Houston. And by the way, it's an underrated city too. Houston food is just they're amazing on a food scene. So check it out.
I was gonna say you kept our tradition alive. Headed over to the Eighth Wonder Brewery
Did.
afterwards. I saw the photo. So
Yeah, it's interesting. We had a crew there. There was another Austin crew that was there. And I think we may have established a trend of the runners kind of escaping over to Eighth Wonder after the race, because there were a bunch of runners actually celebrating there in that back area, and it was about 60 degrees, so it was perfect to be out there. Anyway, it was a great time. Check out Houston if you're interested in finding a fast, flat, half, or full. But let's dig into our topic. We're going to continue the conversation on racing fundamentals, and as we talked about last week, and we've set the stage with our training fundamentals. Now we're talking about racing fundamentals, because really you should start thinking about those things sooner than you think. Last week we talked about trusting your training in your racing. We talked about executing the plan, having a plan and executing it. And we talked about the hard one, racing without fear of failure. Today we've got 3 more to talk about. And I saw some of this in Houston, so we can pull some anecdotes from there. We're going to start with something that is just so fundamental, also counterintuitive for a lot of people to wrap their head around. It's this idea that if you want to race well, you have to start slow and finish strong. Start slow and finish strong. Run a negative split, as we like to say. But that can be counterintuitive for people because they're thinking about, quote, banking time. But we're here to say that the science supports, the stats support, but also experience supports. No, you need to run a negative split. So as we jump into this first one, what are your first thoughts when you think about start slow, finish strong?
The number one thing is that it works. We've seen it so many times just with our own athletes. It's something that I've done it the wrong way and then decided, okay, well, what if I tried to slow down and speed up through the race itself and learned anecdotally that that's a much smarter play. But I also remember this had an impact on me. There was a year, I believe you did, didn't you do a big download and looked at a bunch of
Oh
data?
yeah,
And this
for
was
Austin
even,
Marathon. Yeah,
yeah, you did it for Austin, and then I know we had an athlete one time, Mike, that
did
had
it for
done his
Boston.
own kind of analysis. But I'd rather you share that because I feel like that drives home the point because it gives people data that they can anchor themselves in. Because otherwise, this one feels like somewhat of an intuitive. Like I just often have my athletes. I'm like, trust me, like it's better this way.
Right.
But I'd rather you put some of that data and scaffolding around it. Like,
Yeah, I mean I mean, I've done it myself. We had an athlete do it with Boston. We've had, I mean, but other proper statisticians and scientists have actually done it with big data looking at races and showing that it's optimal to perform if you start slower in these longer races and then finish strong. And I think people struggle with that because they think, especially in a long race, like a half marathon or a marathon, they think, well, unless I put quote time in the bank, when I'm tired at the end and I'm trying to hold on, I'm going to be behind the eight ball, so to speak. And I had somebody tell me recently they wanted to play defense rather than offense at the end of the race. And I'm like, no, you want to be playing offense. And so big data would tell us that any race really longer than a 5K, and then of course through our own analysis, we've seen it with the marathon, any race longer than a 5K is optimal if you run a negative split. So 8K, 10K, and beyond, meaning you start a little bit slower in those early miles, you find your pace, hold it, and then try to finish strong at the end. And, again, the data tells us that, the science tells us that. And then the question becomes, okay, well, why does it work that way? And this is where I like to use analogies so people can understand it. We've talked about using car analogies when it comes to our aerobic system as an engine before. But if you think about our aerobic system as an engine or our body as an engine, if you're taking a car and you're gunning it off of the line when it turns green, you burn more fuel in the first half mile while getting up to speed than you do in the next half mile, even though you're at potentially the fastest speed you're going to reach. So if you were trying to get to 50 and you had to build to get to 50 and that took you a half mile, then you're going to burn more fuel in the first half mile building to 50 than you will once you get there in the next half mile. That's because the car has to warm up, everything has to get firing, you have to get those pistons turning over. And our body's kind of the same way in that you're going to burn more energy at slower paces while you start the race, while you're building into it and warming into it, than you will when you get to mile 3 and you're just cruising at race pace, even though the average pace at that point is faster. And so that's the why. And then of course we have the science and data that supports that. Hey, if you start conservatively, then you can actually finish overall better. And I actually liked Mike's analysis from our group better because it was I think the reference points were easier. So what he did was actually looked at, it was more complicated than this, but I'm going to simplify basically how people started versus how people finished, and then their overall seed coming in versus their place coming out. And in Boston, it's really easy to see. Everybody's seeded their bib numbers based on their time.
Mm.
So from the fastest athlete all the way to those at the back of the pack, you're getting a seed based on your seed time coming in, at least for those that are qualifying. And so if you finish faster than your seed, than your bib number in place, then that means you bested those around you essentially that were of comparable ability. And so he actually looked at the analysis, said, okay, who beat their seed number?
Mm-hmm.
And it was those that had a conservative start, even though Boston's downhill at the beginning, and then really picked it up after Heartbreak Hill at the end, which is true with a Boston profile course as well as if you had a flatter course. I did a similar analysis for the Austin Marathon, again, a hilly course, so it looks a little bit different. And I think what I saw there was those that started too fast, because Austin actually starts uphill. Those that started too fast were much more likely to quote blow up or have significant or positive splits at the end. And that's what you want to avoid. So you want to be able to run a smart race, but it requires a little bit of faith in the approach and buying into the approach, because counterintuitively, some people think, well, if I start fast, quote, bank time, then I'll have some time to kind of hold on to at the end versus when I'm tired versus picking it up when I'm tired. And it just doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
You know, I think at one point we had a stat where it's like every 10 seconds too fast you go in the first mile, I think you lose about 60 seconds on the back end because you're burning too much energy early on. And so the principle we talk about is you want to bank energy, not time. And you're banking energy because you're letting that body naturally build into the race, finding your rhythm, and then you're using that extra energy at the end to close faster. If you look at elite marathoners, those patterns are true. Typically, the world record is an even or slightly negative split, even though those guys are running crazy, crazy fast times. And so, guys and women, so it's the principle here that you have to trust a little bit, and then you can build practice in it and then see it work for yourself and then kind of get it, so to speak. So that's the idea.
I was going to say that one almost requires a little more belief, because I had this conversation this morning. Actually, it came up in our one-on-one, but the athlete was basically saying, it seems after X mile, I tend to fall off anyway. So why not get a little more aggressive on the front end? And I was like, I have to stop you there. Like just right at that point, I was like, I have to cut that off. And I was like, back off of that line of argument and think about what you're saying. Like the doom is built in your mind no matter what. Like you're not even giving yourself a chance. And I didn't come off hard like this in any way, but I was trying to help her like think through that. I was like, but if we did look at training and training goes the way we want it to, then in theory, you're going to have a level of energy and an ability to make a move later in the race itself. And I was like, and if you start with that belief, then you work backwards. Don't you want to make sure there's space for that to make those moves, come home, fight through it, like be picking up time. We typically give about, if it's a flat course, we typically give about a minute to the course in the first 3 miles by doing a little stair step down, 30 seconds, 20 seconds, 10-second hit MGP about mile 4. And so we give it a minute with the belief that we'll make up a minute or more on that back end. But it requires that belief in order for that whole plan as you work backwards to actually make sense. But if someone's starting with, well, I'm gonna blow up at some point anyway, it's like that actually needs to be untangled.
Right.
That belief, that self-limiting belief, needs to be untangled, because not only is it self-limiting, it also will become a self-fulfilling.
Right. I was going to say, and then it's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
Because you make the mistake again and again, thinking that somehow going harder or deeper into that hole is going to somehow allow you to hang on more at the end. And it just magnifies the problem. So, yeah, but it also requires, I think the other interesting part here is that oftentimes when somebody approaches me with that and they say, well, it just doesn't work for me to close at the end, oftentimes their training is also not set up appropriately to really establish that aerobic strength and that resilience that we establish through lots of miles and easy running, which allows you to have staying power at the end of a race, a long race. Because if you've done the training all wrong, then sure, you're going to blow up at the end kind of no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
But if you've done the training the right way, building that resilience, and then you race the right way, it all kind of comes together in a happy, magical goal-setting event.
Yeah.
But it requires a little bit of trust, a little bit of faith, and then practice yourself to see it happen. The other thing I like to point to here is that early in someone's racing career, especially at the longer distances, to me, the most important thing above and beyond total time is how you run the race. Learning to execute a smart race becomes more important than how the clock looks at the end from a total time perspective. Because if you can learn these habits early on while being a little bit more conservative relative to your potential, then that reinforces the fact that this philosophy works. So when you do start to get closer to the edge and more aggressive with your goal setting, you believe it, you know how to execute it, and then you can deliver.
Mm-hmm.
Versus trying to kind of work backwards from, well, I went too fast, I blew up. The time wasn't what I wanted anyway. And so then it's hard to unravel both the fact that you can't do it physically with the mental doubts that creep in when those things happen.
Mm-hmm.
Because then it becomes these conversations like we're talking about where people say, well, I just can't do it.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, well, have you really tried it holistically the right way with the right training and then the right execution? And so when people are going into their first marathons, for example, I always say goal 1 is to finish because we want to get it done. Goal 2 is to finish strong.
Mm-hmm.
And then we'll set up a plan and a target time for them that allows that gives them space for that so that then they know what it looks like. They can have the confidence. If you can run your last mile as your fastest mile in a marathon, then that unlocks so much.
Yeah. It starts to demystify the event. And I think the only thing I want to put like a double exclamation point on is you referenced it and it might have come off quickly and I don't want people to miss it. But that example you gave of for like, it's about every 10 seconds that you press forward on the front end, it's closer to 60 seconds of loss on the back end. I just want to generally say it's exponential.
Right.
Like even if I didn't know those exact numbers, I've just seen it time and again, the degree to which you fall off when you go out too hard, and you've quite literally depleted everything. We're going to talk about this in another one of the points, but it's like you really do kind of squeeze everything out of you on race day. So this is a matter of timing it such that you get to press hard and run your fastest miles as you close. But the takeaway or the double emphasis that I'm putting here is just that when you go out too fast on the front end, the slowdown, the degree to which you slow down is exponential on the back end. And I think I'm only emphasizing that in the hopes that it'll help people trust it.
Right. And so what does that look like? In a marathon, we recommend typically on a flat course going out 30 to maybe even 40 seconds too slow in the first mile, working down over the first 3 to 4, finding that target rhythm by that point, hold it till 21 or 22, and then try to close from there. For a half, it might be 20 to 30 seconds slow in the first mile, trying to get to pace by mile 3. For a 10K, 5 to 15, depending on your experience level. And so you want to give yourself those kinds of buffers, so to speak, in order to really have that energy at the end to finish strongly. And if you can do that and do it patiently, it's going to allow you to unlock potential in races that you wouldn't be able to otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say, going back to the trusting your training point, this all starts in training. I know that, we're both big fans of Coach John Schrupp, one of our former coaches here at Rogue. One of the things he instilled in every single workout was this idea that progression, like you got to progress, meaning if it's 8 times 800 at 10K pace, don't start at 10K pace. Start it a little slower than 10K pace. Work towards 10K pace. And then maybe in the last rep or two, get a little faster than 10K pace. If you had a fartlek forest that was focused around half marathon, start a little bit slower, work down. Tempo runs, same thing. Everything was in progression because it allowed you to not only, I think, more effectively gauge pace and effort, but also teach this principle basically all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you can execute that way in workouts and see the success that it has when you approach it that way so that you're not behind the 8 ball from rep 1, then that'll turn over to and translate to race day in a way that is real.
Mm-hmm.
So
it made me
shout
think
out
of
John Schrupp.
Yeah, freaking love Schrupp. It also just made me think too, like everything really kind of models it. Like we start with priming workouts that advance to aerobic strength, that advance to race specific, that, it's like everything about the system is start easy and finish strong,
Yep. everything in progression. I think I actually have an episode on that very principle, the whole episode. I have to look up the number, but it's so important, and it's culminates in racing. So that's sort of point one here. Start slow, finish strong. We belabored that one perhaps too much, but that just emphasizes how important it is. Second one we're going to cover kind of goes hand in hand in some ways with race without fear of failure, but this idea that you should leave it all on the course.
Mm-hmm.
To me, that is the ultimate barometer for success or quote failure on race day is, did I give my all? Did I give everything I could? And I talked about it a little bit with my Boston example where, had a stress fracture, manifest on race day, couldn't do more than walk. And so that's what I did. And so that day, even though it was my worst marathon time, was an example of giving everything I had. And that just happened to be what I had. And so I think one of the things with this one that's tricky is that it doesn't necessarily look like what people think it looks like.
Mm-hmm.
It's not necessarily just a hard, gritty, like, oh, I gave everything. My eyes are bleeding. Everything's going, to the limit at the end. Like, that's not necessarily what it looks like. It can, but that's not necessarily what it looks like. It's much broader than that. And I actually have a whole episode on what this looks like as well, but it doesn't necessarily look like even being on the accelerator every single second. Because to me, a necessary part of racing or finding your limits or testing your limits is that at some point in that experience, doubt's going to creep in. And it's going to say, oh man, I don't know if I can hold this. Or this is too fast for me. Or maybe I can't do it. And it's going to cause you, even if just for a split second, to back off or question. And to me, leaving it all on the course is not having that happen, because it's going to happen. It's rather responding to it when it does. And so when I think people beat themselves up over moments like that and say, well, I slipped for just a minute or a second because I was having doubts in the middle of the race or the pain was too much. And if you let it overwhelm you and overcome you and win, then maybe that's not an example of this. But if you instead push through that, then that's one of the prototypical examples to me of this, is overcoming those types of thoughts as you race.
Well, there's the overcoming and the problem solving. And then there's also back to kind of like the strategy and you saying, have a plan and trust the plan and stick with the plan. And when I think about, so we're talking about leaving it all out there. I think there's a timing component of, there is a moment in the race that you go to the pain cave and you actually sink your teeth into that, like that gritty part, but you can't do that for 26.2 miles. Right. And I remember chewing long and hard on the idea of like, what does it mean to quote, bring my all to the table? And I mean that in a very holistic sense. It's kind of how I came up with my talk tracks for races. And I use a pretty similar set of like, at least like you could think of them as archetypes or personas or hats you put on throughout the race itself. And it's always like, wait, like in the training, you have easy days, calm days, relaxed days. You have days that you're like, man, that ate my lunch. You have days where just all business and you get it done and you check it off. And it was like, wait, I look at the holistic training experience, the holistic human lived experience. Like we are peaceful, loving creatures. We're happy and joyous creatures. We're strategic, like on point, checking off boxes from a list. We're like fighters and warriors. And then we have that like extreme side of like, I believe and I'll do anything I have to. And I was like, how do we mix that? How do we take all of that instead of saying, I'm just going to experience it at random times, like random popcorn popping? It's like, you can actually order those things. Like that's how I came up with the idea of like, for me, it was like calm as a monk, right? But you could think of anything calming. And then like a 5-mile section of like all business where it's like bip, bip, bip. I'm controlling the clock. I'm setting the tone. It's sort of like, I would think of experiences in my life and even others. I would observe people that are professionals. And it's like, I know you know how to throw on the blazer and put on the dress shirt and be all controlled and organized with your calendar and moving from meeting and meeting. And I'm like, that's cool. That's like miles 6 through 10. Like that's a good opportunity to sort of set the tone in your legs and find a rhythm there. And then it's like, there's other sections where it's, I try to invite in the joy because I know the the pain's eventually coming. Like, yes, I think when people prepare for their ultimate A race, they should expect suffering. But I just think that if people are thinking about the word suffering on the start line, they've ruined everything we're trying to encourage them with. And so I think like leaving it all out there in part is bringing your all, bringing the peaceful, calm, controlled, relaxed. I know how to start right. Then getting into your like control, 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 and then take in the journey. And then in those later stages where it's hard, but you're not dying yet, it's like take on the military attitude of like, I've got a job to do. I come in, I get it done. And then in that last section, then you get to quote, go to the well. That's when you get to bring out that warrior where it's like gloves are off and you're picturing all kinds of crazy imagery and you're like, I will do anything. I will suffer through anything. I will hurt like I've never hurt. It's like, I think of that part, that deep seated know your why and like go to the well and all that. That's like an octane booster. And you click that button too soon in the race, well, you've bombed your whole race, but you appropriately time it. You save that deep, dark stuff in order to fight through the worst part. It's like, well, now you've got a strategy that sort of encompasses a lot of what we're saying. It's like, I think the way by which to, quote, leave it all on the course is to, one, bring your all, and then bring it in proper and strategic order such that you really can cross that line. I mean, in my head, I'm like 26.1 is when I want the entire sponge to feel like it's been squeezed and somehow I survived that last 0.1. Like I want to squeeze it all out, but at the right time such that it benefits me.
You make the point well that this is much richer than just thinking about that warrior going to the well or doing something insane. Part of leaving it on the course is having a plan and executing your plan with precision.
Mm-hmm.
It may not look gritty necessarily. It might look really smooth. And I think also having depth and dimension as you deal with the problems that you might face on race day. I remember one of my marathon PRs was a day that in Brighton College Station where I started the race. It was a really cold day. It was maybe upper 20s at the start. And so it was taking some time, even though I was executing my plan, it was taking some time for the legs to warm into the race. And so I got to race pace around mile 4 and I felt like it was way too hard. I remember thinking, man, this is way too hard for mile 4 of a 26.2 mile race, but I'm going to hold it. I'm going to commit to it. I mean, what else am I going to do? And so I committed to it, and mile 5 came, still felt too hard. Like, oh man, this is going to be a long day where I'm going to have to walk off this course. I don't know why. I was asking myself all of these questions. What happened? Why is this so hard? I've done this in training so often. It's so early. Why is this so hard right now? And at that point in the race, there would have been no help in going to that gritty warrior mentality.
Mm-hmm.
You couldn't hold that kind of mentality for 21 miles. So I remember doing the only thing I knew to do, which was to go the other way, which is go to the yogi mentality, the relaxed mentality, the monk mentality, as you were talking about, where suddenly I was closing my eyes, meditating, focusing on my breathing, really just trying to relax the entire body. And I'll go through this routine that I have where I try to relax my face and my shoulders and my hands and arms, and then even my legs. And I just went into that mode, and I started really focused on deep controlled breathing. And mile 6 still felt too hard. Mile 7 felt too hard. Finally, somewhere in mile 8, it all just settled. And the body relaxed into the pace. And then it suddenly felt easy. And while it wasn't completely easy the rest of the way, my hardest miles actually came from 4 to 8 in that race. After that, it was almost smooth sailing, ran well, ended up with a PR at the end with a strong finish. And that was the first time in my life that I'd ever experienced such a challenge so early in a marathon versus normally you think about it late.
Mm-hmm.
But that was a picture of giving my all, even though it wasn't all about finding the limits at edge or being a warrior at all. It was actually going into my yogi kind of calm mentality that allowed me to unlock something there. So the moral of the story here is just that this doesn't necessarily look like what you think it does.
Mm-hmm.
Another quick anecdote I'll tell on this front is, And I think it applies to a day like Houston, where I've had, pre-race talks that I've done in various places. I can think about CIM in 2018. There was a year in Boston where the weather was pretty good for Boston, and it's funny because then people start to get nervous about it because they don't have an excuse anymore. The pressure is all on performance if the weather works out really well. And so more often than not, I see people get anxious and nervous in those moments because like, oh no, there's nothing to hide behind. There's no weather to blame. So what am I going to do? And so naturally in those moments, I think about a Latin phrase that we hear, carpe diem, seize the day. And I've done a pre-race talk on that idea, seize the day, because in the Western world, in America, we think of seize the day as kind of like a take a bull by the horns, like aggressive concept. But if you go back to the Latin, seize the day, carpe diem, it actually translates to pluck the day. And the idea that they're trying to convey there was not this take a bull by the horns mentality, but rather the imagery you think about when it's a beautiful spring day outside and you're working inside. And instead of working, you go out and you experience that beautiful day and you pick a flower and you pluck the petals and you admire the beauty of the flower. So it's actually a very Zen concept if you think about it in the Latin. And that's kind of what we're talking about here. It's not this take a bull by the horns gritty thing. It's much more nuanced than that. It has that component, but appropriately used and managed, but it also has much more dimension to it. And so we'll be talking about this more as we go, but a little
I like that
meta conversation.
You got me seeing visions in my head, and I was like, when I lifted today, it was very much that experience. I was like, even in a single day session, like, I started off with the bar, right, to get my arms in the right spot, and then I stacked on weight. And at some point in the workout, yes, I'm in that gritty, just grunting from my stomach and chest and like pushing against the edge. But that's like the peak of the workout. And then when I had stepped outside after a little sauna and shower, I was like, man, it was a beautiful day. And I just stood there for a couple of minutes. I was like, to me, that was the whole thing made the workout like righteous, so to speak. And there is carryover and application to your race day. I love that. Pluck the day.
So we got a little meta there, but taking it back to more concrete things, at the end of the day, if you show up on a race course, you have a plan, you execute the plan, and then you give everything you have in all the dimensions that can look like, then you can stand at that finish line and be proud. And that's not to say, and claim success. And that's not to say that you won't be frustrated, mad, disappointed, angry, whatever the emotions that might come from missing your goal. Because I experienced all of those emotions walking the end of the Boston Marathon. So it doesn't make you immune from those things, but it does mean that once you process all of those emotions, you can stand with your head held high and say, I gave everything I could. And then, by the way, take your lessons from it and go get it the next time. And while that wasn't my PR day in Boston, I wrote a blog about that experience actually that I shared on my Instagram clip of that shared in the comments on that Instagram clip that I shared about Boston. And that was written in after the race sometime in May, I think it was May or June. And I said, at the end, I walked away confident that my fastest days were still ahead because of the lessons of that training cycle and that race. Sure enough, 2 years later in 2018, I PR'd in the marathon. So, I had another day that was the day that I was dreaming of. It just didn't happen that day. All right. So that's number 5 on our list. Number 2 today, leave it all on the course. If you can do that, you can be proud. You got one more thing?
Well, I'm wondering if I can put you on the spot because this came up on a live Q&A, and I think there's some value here. So this whole time I was thinking we're reiterating the concept and we're talking about like the ideal. And yes, we start easy and we finish strong and we bring our all by having all these different hats we wear. But there was someone that brought this up on a live Q&A, and I think I didn't even consider that in any of my responses thus far, but it's okay when someone is off, like that example, like if they're off and their target time is not going to be in the cards, what would you say to that athlete with this concept in mind? Like, why should they still leave it all out on the course, even
Yeah.
if like they realized at 18 they can't make up in 8 miles what they need?
It's a good question. And for this, I'll go to one of my favorite, other than keep showing up, one of my favorite Des Linden quotes, where she talks about on those days, you want to find out who you are on your worst day.
Hmm.
There's so much to still learn
Mm-hmm.
by pushing the limits. You know, I ran with one of our former rogues in Houston for a little bit, and he was having a tough day. And he asked me in real time as we were cruising briefly next to each other around mile 11 of the half. He said, "Why do we do this?"
Mm-hmm.
And I said that quote. I said, "To see who you are on your worst day."
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that's where the richness is. Honestly, I mean, we do it to get the goals, but we also do it because we think it might be hard at some point.
Yeah.
And it might be hard on the good days, but it's going to be hard on the bad days too. And to me, that's where you can get the most growth sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, you know, we talked about this in my pre-race talk in Columbus. You know, we define success oftentimes so narrowly. It's associated with a time on the clock when it is so much bigger than that. So if you take the time off the clock or take that off the table, and understand we're measuring ourselves, so that's a part of the equation. But if you take that off the table, then what are we learning? And just like if it's a hot day and you have to slow down accordingly, you can have an amazing race that you can be proud of with so much richness and so many lessons. The same can be true if you're 18 miles in the race and the wheels are off a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
What are you going to learn in those moments? And that to me is honestly where the good stuff is and where the formative stuff is, because that toughness translated to a day that's going well and more smoothly is where the magic is. And look, you know, I think somebody asked me this on one of the comments on the Boston clip, you know, it's like, why did you keep going?
Mm.
Because honestly, there are days when you shouldn't. So I'm not here to say you should always finish the race. I think that's a dangerous mentality as well.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I have one marathon that I didn't finish. Twin Cities back in, I think, what was that, 2004 or 5? 2005? DNF'd Twin Cities. Came into that race fitter than ever, but had just started a job and was working way too many hours and came in honestly completely exhausted from 2 months of a new job that was just way too intense, and walked off the course at mile 18 because I was done physically.
Mm-hmm.
I had nothing left to give. I'd actually given it all already at that point in the race. And so I walked off, and Amy was there, and she was like, "Wait, what are you doing?" You know, I was like, I'm done. And that was the right decision on that day.
Mm-hmm.
I would make it again, you know, sitting here many years later. And so there are those decisions to be made, and I'm not throwing stones at anybody who makes that decision.
Yeah.
Because that might be the right choice on a given day, and it was for me on that day. Now, obviously, you want to avoid that as a pattern or an excuse when you can finish, but yeah, there's still so much to learn. Don't stop the lesson just because you're off.
Yeah. Yeah. And you touched on this right before you gave that last example, and I'm glad you did, because there's exceptions to every rule always. But yeah, like you said, A, you don't want to make a pattern, and then B, you had said like when the day's good, that's where the magic is. And I was going to say, not only is there magic there, but also your best race will actually require that same level of like fight and discipline. It just feels a little bit different exponentially because you're making gains.
Right.
You're like, man, I just mile 23, I took 5 seconds off mile 22. And then in mile 24, I took another 5 seconds off, and that's 10 off 22 now. And so it's like, you know, like when you're eating it up in the way of gains, it's as equally rigorous. Like it requires, and I think someone who passed on the opportunity to learn how to fight like a dog in a race where it didn't go perfectly isn't ready for that moment, that special magic day when it does show up. Right. So like a veteran athlete, if we were sitting with someone that's a veteran athlete, they would get this because they will have seen how that bad experience 2 years later shaped into the good, and they see the holistic storyline that they're like, I got to where I am now because of all of these experiences. So trusting it on the front end is a little bit harder, but I would say, to the best of your ability, trust us in that, like, if you want that magic A-race special kind of crowning moment day, you're going to fight just as hard for that one as you do on those ugly days. So practice the fight.
For sure. You got to learn it when it's not going your way. It will translate. All right. So that's Leave It All on Your Course. Last one we'll talk about today, and this really kind of wraps up our conversation around chapter 2 of the book, is do it for yourself and for others. So this kind of dovetails with one of our training principles, the idea that you're going to be better if you have the accountability of a team. But when it comes to race day, I think you're going to be better, and you're also going to have a richer experience if you have others to do it for. And I think there's kind of two sides to this coin. I think one, there's an accountability that comes with others watching.
Mm-hmm.
And two, there's an opportunity that comes with others watching. And the opportunity is the ability to inspire others to do things also that they may not think are possible. And when you're in a group that's doing that together and everybody's feeding off of each other, I mean, it's amazing what happens. It's amazing what happens because, I mean, just using our group, the Renegades, as an example, our virtual online group, there are people that will be racing that may not have met each other, that may have simply read a race report that said, hey, this happened to me and this is what I did about it and this is how I got through it. Then they will have that in their head when they go into a similar challenge into a race day, and they're going to think, if that person can do it, even though I didn't witness it, I've never met them, but I can just feel their energy through a virtual connection, then I can do it too.
Mm-hmm.
And we have that virtually in palpable ways through Renegades and Rising and Team Rogue Virtual. We also have it in all of our physical groups where there's just this ripple effect that happens when everybody's striving and achieving together, and when they're watching someone else fail and then come back from failure and get it. And we've had people in those groups, in all those groups, maybe not get their goal a bunch of times, but keep working through it, get back up, keep going. And then finally they get it.
Mm-hmm.
And so then when that happens to you, you say, hey, they did it. I'm going to do it. And I see how fulfilling that can be. So there's just amazing, this ripple effect. And so, yes, running is a solo sport if you want it to be. And I'm not going to argue with anybody that prefers that approach. But I'm just telling you, it can be really, really rich if you do it for your own reasons, have your own purpose, but also do it for others. And I would include in that others, not just those that might be your running partners, but also those that support you in these goals. You know, your spouse, your friends, your family members, your partner, whoever it may be, who's out there cheering you on, who's tolerating the fact that you wake up early on a Saturday morning to go get a long run done, and then who shows up early on a cold day to cheer you on when they're not able to benefit from a body heat of moving. And so do it for them too. And it's sort of a way to repay that with gratitude for those that are supporting you along the journey. So I'll pause there.
This is one I'm going to stumble through because I feel like it's meaningful and I have so much to say, but it doesn't always have to be like a clean, concise argument. So I'm just going to respond. But it's like, one, I always think of investments. So I'll start on the solo side, like do it for yourself. Like that's actually one of my favorite things because I do believe that the marathon it develops so much agency. Like just learning how to run them and get on top of them is special. I never want to take that for granted. Like I always want to just remain anchored in that thought because I know that as people get better and better and better and better, they're chasing the next standard, which is also something I applaud and I encourage and I help people do as a coach. But at the same time, it's like never lose touch with the base of like you got yourself here and that's pretty dang special. So I like to think of it in terms of investment. Like we use the money in the bank analogy a couple of times already when we quoted Lydiard, and it's like, all right, you go in and get all that money, then remind yourself on race day, I want to start slow. Like, have a plan, trust that plan, execute, time it such that I close really hard and leave it all on the course, because it's like, I have invested so much, finish off that investment. It's like you really have put time and money and energy into this. And then that other people thing, I just want to share a story, because again, it's hard to separate them, because like throughout the entire race, you'll toggle. I know I do. It's like in one moment I'm like, no, this matters to me and I need to do it for myself. And then there's another moment where it's like, you know what? If I'm the only one keeping track of this, then I'm done. Cause like, there's moments where it's hard and you want to throw in the towel. And that's when that reminder hits you. But I want to tell something more special. I had a woman who joined Rogue Rising and ran her first marathon. And she cried at the end for all the obvious reasons, because when you complete that first one, it's so dang special. But there was a woman that came up to her and was like, you inspired me the whole way. I just kept watching you and following you, and I was trying to keep you in sight. And she didn't even have space in her head to consider that she might have an impact on someone on the course, because she was so terrified of her own doubts and fears and wonders if like I can even do this, that she couldn't even imagine or fathom that she might have a ripple effect. And that made me instantly think of like, okay, this is back to that do it for yourself, do it for others, in the sense of like Paul Terranova and Allison Maxis were my original heroes within running, and I still think of them as like two of my running heroes. And I'm just like, what if Paul wasn't doing it so he could inspire me, but Paul inspired me, and I have to wonder, what would my story be without Paul in the beginning? And same with Allison. She didn't do that for me. She was out pursuing her own goals, but by living her way, it was an inspiration to me. I'm a coach that now has a ripple effect into other people's lives. I'm like, I actually think that people should just trust that you have more ripple effect than you know, and it's not even worth going and trying to figure out where your ripple goes and who it impacts. I know it would feel lovely to get all the gratitude in the world that you think you might deserve, or maybe don't even think about deserving, but I'm saying like, no, there's something bigger happening. Like when you show up and make good on your investments and say, I'm going to choose to operate this way, I'm going to hold myself accountable, and I'm going to see my investment all the way through, there is a ripple effect, even when you can't see it. And it's like, I believed that. And then hearing this first time marathoner, that was about 6 months ago that I had her interview. So I'm like, that's a very recent one, fresh in my mind. And I'm just like, remember, Gabrielle, you have no idea who's watching, right?
Yeah.
And you don't want to rob anyone of that.
Right.
Their opportunity to be inspired by you.
It's cool. It's cool. It's also a reminder that regardless of where you are in the pack or whether your experience is a lot or a little, you can actually affect others.
Mm-hmm.
And I think sometimes those that might be middle or back of the pack or think of themselves in a different context, as not as fast or as important as anybody else because of their starting point or their experience. No, actually, you can be just as inspirational.
Mm-hmm.
And in my mind, sometimes even more so, because your journey to get to wherever you want to go has more obstacles.
Yeah.
You may not have the genetic proclivities of others, and you may not have the natural background in it. You may not have grown up playing sport, but to be able to still do the things and then get what you want and do things that other people would tell you can't do, that's where the good stuff is most often.
Yeah. Well, and it's like, I hope people see like every rung of the ladder connected. We've done horse riding in New Mexico together, and I remember, these are the kind of horses that they're so trained and always on the same course that it's like that lead one is out there, and then the next one follows, and the next one follows, and the next one follows, and the next one follows. And it's like, I hope that everyone can see themselves in that continuum, because do we all want to be winners? Yes. Do we all want to be the champ? Yes. Do we all want to be the alpha? Yeah. But just by saying that, not everyone can be, right? These are hierarchies that we create in the spirit of competition so we can crown a winner. And that's a beautiful thing, and that's a good thing. I'm not backing off of that. However, we need that winner to be the winner so that next crew chases their edge, so that crew behind them chases their edge, so that and it backs all the way up. And then even outside of the sport, you never know ripples that you're having, because I had a buddy call me yesterday and he was like, well, you're a running coach, and my other best friend owns a CrossFit gym. And I'm thinking, what the heck am I doing? And he used different choice words. And so he got himself out the door, and he's just getting into physical movement. And I'm like, again, example of like ripple effect, that you're like, stop trying to measure it all. Recognize that we're all interconnected and we're in this continuum. And it's like, we need our A players to be A players. And I don't even want to go down that because I want to make people think they're B and C players, but
They're not.
but there is a degree of understanding that we all need one another, and we're all in this continuum. We're like horses following one another on a trail.
Indeed. So do it for yourself and do it for those around you. It will cause you to get more out of yourself. It will also cause you to enjoy the journey even more.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's our final kind of racing fundamental, stepping outside of yourself to see that there's something bigger at play. And there's magic in that will lead to not only faster times, but richer experiences. So there you go. 3 for today's episode, our final 4, 5, and 6 of chapter 2 on racing fundamentals. Start slow, finish strong, leave it all in the course, do it for yourself and for others. Any final thoughts on this one?
No, I'm glad at first I was thinking like, wait, we're coming out with all these racing principles, and I was thinking about local programming being in training. But like you said, Houston happened last weekend. I know one athlete already said something, that they took something from last week's conversation. And then we've got another big race locally here, but we've got Austin Marathon coming up in February, Tokyo coming up. So I'm like, cool, I'm kind of glad we went into these race strategies.
That's right. And whether you have a race coming up or not, still something to start percolating on, marinating on as you get ready for whenever your race might be. With that, we'll remind you a few things before we wrap the episode. First of all, if you're listening on audio, you can now check us out on YouTube if you want to see our faces while we talk to each other. And you can go to our YouTube channel, the Rogue Running YouTube channel, to check those out. These are all now in full video form, whether you like it or not. Also, we just started a bunch of programming. You can jump into any of our in-person programming in Austin or Dallas area right now. We also have 3 different virtual groups, depending on your experience level: Rogue Rising, Rogue Renegades, and Team Rogue Virtual, that you can jump into. All great communities to join if you have a goal. And then, of course, we coach one-on-one if you prefer that route as well. So plenty of options there for anybody who might be interested in training with us. You can check those out at roguerunning.com, or you can just email us, coaching@roguerunning.com, and we'll get your questions answered and point you in the right direction. I think that's it for today. Let's wrap this one. As always, you can check us out at roguerunning.com or on Instagram @roguerunning, or my Instagram if you want, @roguechris. Until next time, we'll talk to you soon.